Hello and welcome to Quick Bites. I'm Mark Lassoff. On this episode, we're going to be discussing HTML emails. There's nothing particularly tricky about HTML-based emails, it's just a web page. However, most email clients make lousy web browsers, so there's a few things you should know in advance to create HTML emails that work well. You're going to be a lot more limited when developing HTML emails than you would in a regular web page. Let's get to the code on this episode of Quick Bites. Let's go ahead and create an email with HTML. So I've already got here a couple of images that I created in Photoshop that are going to be integrated into the email. The first thing to remember, and perhaps the most important thing to remember about HTML email, is that your images have to live on a server. Typically, we would include the images in a folder along with the HTML. But remember that your HTML is being rendered in an email client, and the email client simply takes the HTML code and tries to render it. So there's no such thing as a local image file, or a local link for that matter. So we've got to put these either on a web server or use Amazon Web Services or a competitor. I happen to use Amazon Web Services, and I've uploaded both the JPEGs for the actual email. The PSD files, these are the original Photoshop files, and we don't really care about those for our purposes. So here we are in Amazon Web Services, and there's my footer graphic and my header graphic. You'll notice Amazon Web Services provides a link to the actual graphic. So as I write my HTML, I'll copy this link in there to display it. Now, one thing to think about is that your email will likely be displayed on email clients within devices of vastly different screen width. So you might have someone who displays it, for example, on an actual full screen desktop computer, and someone else on an iPad, and yet someone else on an iPhone that's not even a Retina model, that's not that wide. So you want to make sure your email looks good at a maximum number of devices. So I've got a little trick here. Now, normally I would tell you never do layout with tables. However, for HTML emails, that's the perfect way to do the layout, ironically. So I've already created a skeleton for our HTML that's going to become our email. I've called it email.html. And you'll notice here in the body I've got a table. Now, really, you should avoid using CSS as much as possible. Looks like I repeated the width right there. We'll just take that out. So here, what I did was I used just a little CSS. And I said the maximum width is going to be 600 pixels. And the width should be 100%. What that means is it's generally going to fill the space allowed by the email client up to a maximum of 600 pixels. So this way it won't stretch out too far, but it'll fill the screen on smaller devices. And what you're going to see is that'll actually make our graphics shrink along with the screen size. So let's go ahead and put in our header and footer first. So we'll put our header and footer each in their own table row. I'd advise you not to make your tables too complicated. The more complicated your email is to render, the more likely that the email client's going to screw it up and it's not going to look good. All right, so we'll have in here, this will be our header image, and this will be our footer image. And then we'll go back to the Amazon Web Services window and we'll get the URL for these. So I still have that open here in my browser. First we need the header. So I'm just going to grab this URL and copy it, and then place it right in there. And you can see actually even in my development environment, I happen to be using Brackets, which is a free downloadable development environment. You can use it on Mac, PC. It displays the actual graphic, so I know it's pointed to the right place. Let's go ahead and grab the footer from AWS. And the part of AWS I'm using is just a giant storage area. And it has a distribution network that allows it to render quickly no matter where the client is and what type of server they're going through. All right, so let's go ahead and, oops, that was the wrong one. We want to copy that link location. There we go. Okay, so let's copy the link location. And now, boom, we should have our footer. And there you can see it's verified by the environment. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width on these to 100%. Now that means it's going to be 100% the width of the table. Remember, the table we've set to a max width of 600 pixels and a width of 100% of the parent, which would be the browser or email client window. So what that's going to result in is this. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in our browser. Go ahead and open this with Firefox. So there we are at full width, and you can see it displays the header and the footer. But what if our screen were smaller? Notice that the graphics shrink in proportion to the width of the browser window, or what would be your email client window. So that's an important point. So this graphic is going to look good and full at any screen width, and the user isn't going to have to scroll from side to side to see your entire email. You absolutely want to avoid the user having to side scroll. Now from here, you're going to want to use pretty standard HTML markup for your content. So let's go ahead and put in here, we can put in another row, and let's have an H1, so the main news story. And then let's have a couple of paragraphs of content. I'm going to borrow the content from my friend and yours, Lorem Ipsum, or the Lipsum site, which just lets us borrow some kind of Latin content here. We just need, let's say, 3 paragraphs. And there we go. It's just placeholder text. So this way we don't have to write actual stories, just to practice with the HTML skills needed for email. So I'll go ahead and put these in here, just with Control V. And then let's go ahead and wrap these in paragraph tags. So closing paragraph. I think my IDE here is trying to be more help than I need. It keeps closing my tags, and I'm not used to that. There we go. And one more. All right, so let's take a look at how this looks. All right, so we've saved, and let's bring up our browser again. Let's grab our file. Can just drop it in there like that, I think. Nope, let's go ahead and do it the other way. Open with Firefox. There we go. And you'll notice here something didn't go quite right, because our main story is up here and our graphics are down here. So let's check our code real quick. You might have seen me doing this. So it looks like we've got our footer there. And I've already found the problem. I did a table row, but I didn't bother to use a table data tag to surround the entire cell. Let's go ahead and get that in there. And now let's take a look at it again in the browser. Now it should render almost correctly. And there we go. So now we still can do some styling to our actual content. Now we want to do the styling inline. Again, counterintuitive, because normally you would say, no, I'd never do the styling inline. But it's actually the best way to do it here. So if we want this here, we might use the old HTML style of using, background equals, BG color equals, and then some color like CC. That's very old school and obviously not recommended anymore. But if we go ahead and take a look at this again here, it works. See, it gave us that gray background color. But we also can use embedded styles like this. Like, for example, let's say we wanted to use font family Arial. So we use an Arial font. So now, if we go back here and take a look at this one more time, I've taken out the gray background, but now we get the Arial font. So there is some level of creativity here, but again, you want to be very, very careful with how much you do. because, again, you get to a point where it either becomes difficult for the user to manipulate, or more importantly, it doesn't render correctly in the email client. So now let's say we wanted that bottom link here to actually link to the Facebook in the email client. Here we're simply going to use a typical anchor. So we're going to surround the graphic with the anchor tag. And since it says click to like us on Facebook here, I'm simply going to link this to our Facebook. Facebook.com, learntoprogram.tv. So now if the user clicks this in the email client when they receive the email, it'll act like a regular link. So go down here, click it, boom, there we are in the Learn to Program Facebook. So there you've got the basics of creating an HTML email. Keep in mind, the simpler, the better. That wraps up this episode of Quick Bites. I'm Mark Lassoff, and we'll see you next time.